President Trump has said he wants to sign the GOP tax bill into law by July 4th. But the bill passed by a narrow 215-214 margin in the House and still needs to be voted through the Senate. Here to break down the path ahead for the bill and the Republicans' agenda and what it's going to do to the deficit is Doug Holtz-Eakin, former director of the Congressional Budget Office and president of the American Action Forum. Doug, it's always good to see you here. So do you think that Senate Republicans who are more fiscally conservative will have any success here in getting some tweaks to the bill? And are those tweaks going to make much of a difference in the big picture?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we'll see how much of an appetite for change the Senate has. The two big moving pieces are what's the appetite for spending cuts? And certainly the Senate budget resolution didn't show the same appetite as the fiscal conservatives in the House. I don't know if recent developments in the bond market may have changed that. That'll be worth watching. And in general, how much can they take on in terms of cutting the spending programs? And then there's the question of the bill itself. From an economic point of view, there's a lot less at stake here than there was in 2017, which was a dramatic reform of business taxation and much simplification. This extends current law, which will do essentially nothing for the growth path of the economy, adds a bit in investment incentives, which are important, but not dramatically large. And then just a whole host of things which are not simplification, which are no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, special carve-outs for seniors. There's not a lot at stake there. That's a short-run bump in the economy at best. So they may decide to get more serious and take a page out of 2017 and do more fundamental reforms. We shall see.
Hey, Doug, Simeon Hyman, if there's not that much at stake here, does that mean there's not enough here to offset, say, this most benign 10% tariff level if we get there? Is there just not enough to offset it?
Well, first, I hope we end up with just a 10% tariff and we can characterize it as benign. But, we have a lot more than that on the table right now, and there's not near enough here to offset that. So I am concerned about the growth path of the economy. The biggest accomplishment of the legislation would be to avoid a sunset of the 17 law, which is a $400 billion tax increase next year. And we say, well, that's not particularly desirable, but we've already done that this year. And so certainly we don't need both.
And so, Doug, if we see sort of the base case of this bill passing in some form, even if it's just an extension of the tax cut, if indeed the base case is 10% universal tariffs, if that's where we end up, what does all of that put together mean economically?
I think not a lot, quite frankly. The U.S. has a trend growth rate somewhere in the 1.8 to 2% range. There's talk of some of this moving into 3%. I don't see anything in the tax plus tariff world that looks like a dramatic change in that trend growth rate. You need to have some genuine, powerful supply side incentives, like getting the corporate rate from 35 to 21. We don't have anything like that on the table right now. And so I don't expect big changes. There might be some short run boost from a lot of cash in the hands of people who get, no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. But that's a transitory thing and won't get you past 2026 probably at best.
So, Doug, I'm going back to the downgrade. And I know Moody's was the last of the three, but I take a look at AAA rated U.S. industrials. And AAA rated, which the U.S. is not anymore, have zero spread to treasuries at the 3-month tenor, but a 50 basis point spread to treasuries at the 10-year. So we know that time exacerbates credit risk. Are you worried at all about the downgrade or the de-dollarization, any of that? Does that come into your thought process?
Yes, I am worried about this. So, we got downgraded in 2011 by S&P Global, and they said, boy, the politics in the United States are really bad. And then in 23, Fitch said, the U.S. does not seem to have the political wherewithal to manage its finances effectively. Both of those were about the process. Moody's said, you have too much debt and too much interest. That's the problem. It's a very different downgrade, and one that I think is far more serious because it's not talking about the politics. It's saying whoever's there has got too much debt and they're going to have to carry too much interest. That's a real concern. And, we've seen no particular appetite for dealing with deficit fiscal position thus far in the Trump administration. And I certainly hope that that tune changes. We really can't afford to just likely go down this trajectory much longer.
Doug, I'm sure I've heard you say that before, and a lot of folks have been saying that,
Sure I've said that before.
for years, right? So
Yeah.
there's no appetite for this. That much is very clear in D.C. Some people are talking about it, but broadly, there's no appetite. The thing I keep coming back to is, what would change that? What would force the hand? Would it have to be some kind of credit crisis on the part of the U.S., or are we just going to kind of muddle along until something breaks?
So, a favorite theory is it takes a crisis. And I certainly, have been asked a lot, when does the crisis hit? And the truth is, I don't know the answer, and I don't want to run the experiment. I don't know how long we can do this. I want to tell you a short fairy tale about how it gets fixed, and it revolves around Social Security. It is the case that for years, Social Security has been the third rail, and no one wants to touch it. But the trust fund is going to go bankrupt in 8 years, maybe less at the next trustees report. And that means that in the absence of action, retirees get a 21% across the board cut, which you and I both know is never going to happen. But that means there will be Social Security reform somewhere in the next 8 years. And that's a good thing. And if you're 55 right now and you want to retire at 65, you don't know what your benefit will be. And increasingly, people are going to understand that. And when they go to the town hall, it's not going to be, hey, don't touch Social Security. It's going to be, hey, what am I going to get? When are you guys going to settle this? How are you going to fix it? And that's a good thing. That's a debate we have to have. I think events are going to force it on us, not political courage, but we're going to have to come to terms with that. And once you start, pulling at the Social Security thread, you can't do this all on seniors. They're going to start looking everywhere in the budget. And so I expect a reemergence of genuine debate over policy issues in the budget over the next 5 or 6 years.
I'm always baffled. We're all living longer, we hope. Why doesn't anybody talk about the obvious solution of just pushing back the retirement age just 2 or 3 years? Wouldn't that massively help the problem?
It would have big impacts over long periods of time. But, if you let it get to the position we have, which is you have only a few years and you've got to get money in the trust fund, you're going to see, I think, the payroll tax cap raised, some measure which brings cash in the near term. And then you also have to accompany that with genuine fixes to the growth and benefits, because our arithmetic budget problem is not complicated. Social Security and Medicare are more than 1/2 of all non-interest spending over the next 10 years. They are the bulk of the budget, and they grow faster than everything else. Social Security grows at 5.5%, Medicare at 7 to 7.5%. And so unless we slow the growth of those spending programs, you can raise taxes, but they'll just outgrow the tax base even at the higher rates. And you can't just keep chasing it. You got to fix it. So fixing those programs becomes the key.
Doug, great to catch up with you as always. Thank you.